Your fiancé is betraying you tonight, Your Grace." The music stopped. The Duke's hand, encased in a pristine white glove, tightened around Eloin's mud-caked fingers. Eloin stood in the center of the Blackthorne ballroom, a flower girl in a tattered red dress, smelling of damp earth and desperation. Every eye in the tun was a dagger. "Repeat that," Duke Cassian commanded. His voice was a low, lethal growl. Eloin didn't look at the crowd. She looked at Lady Vivienne, who stood 10 feet away, her face turning the color of chalk. Behind Vivienne, Lord Adrian Montclair was already backing toward the shadows of the conservatory. "She isn't carrying your heir," Eloin rasped, her voice cutting through the silence. "She's carrying his." A collective gasp ripped through the room. Vivienne stepped forward, her hand raised to strike. "She's a thief, a gardener's help. Guards, throw this lying creature out." The Duke didn't move. He looked at the smear of black soil Eloin's hand had left on his white glove. Then he looked at Vivienne's trembling lip. "If she's lying," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "then why is Lord Montclair wearing your engagement silk under his coat?" Adrian froze. The Duke stepped toward Eloin, reaching into the dirt-stained pocket of her ruined gown. He pulled out a gold signet ring, the Montclair crest. "I found it in the dirt," Eloin said, "where they just were." The Duke turned to the room, his eyes like ice. He didn't call the guards for Eloin. He grabbed Vivienne's wrist and stripped the Blackthorne diamond off her finger. "The engagement is over," he announced, the sound echoing off the gold leaf ceiling. He turned back to Eloin, the woman the tun had spent a year mocking. He didn't offer her a coin, he offered her his arm. "Lady Ashmere," he said, loud enough for every gossip to hear, "I believe you've just earned back your title and my bed." The shadows of the conservatory were thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting lilies. Eloin Ashmere pressed her back against a cold stone pillar, her breath coming in shallow, jagged gasps. Just 10 feet away, framed perfectly by a golden, ornate archway, Lady Vivienne Harrowmont was laughing. It wasn't the polite, tinkling laugh she gave the Duke. It was the sharp, jagged sound of a predator who had already won. "He actually thinks the Blackthorne lineage is safe with me," Vivienne hissed, her fingers twisting the heavy silk of her engagement gown. She leaned into Lord Adrian Montclair, her hand disappearing behind his neck. "Cassian is a fool, Adrian, a powerful, wealthy, arrogant fool." Eloin's fingers dug into the dirt of the flowerbed she was tending. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A year ago, she was the red diamond of the tun. Now she was a ghost in a soot-streaked gown, hired to arrange the flowers for the man who had once been her world. "Let him play the hero," Adrian whispered, his voice thick with a triumphant edge. He pulled Vivienne closer, his thumb stroking her jaw. "Let him pay for the finest jewels. By the time he realizes the child you carry bears my blood and not his, the Montclair debts will be buried under Blackthorne gold." The secret hit Eloin like a physical blow. It wasn't just an affair, it was a bloodline heist. "I have the ring, Vivienne," Adrian murmured, pulling a heavy gold band from his waistcoat. "A pledge, wear it beneath your glove. Let the Duke's diamond touch your skin, but let my crest touch your soul." As Adrian slid the Montclair signet ring onto Vivienne's finger, the light from a passing footman's lantern flickered across the archway. Vivienne gasped, pulling back into the light. "Did you hear that?" she demanded, her eyes darting toward the dark ferns. Eloin froze. A single, dried rose snapped under her weight. The sound was like a pistol shot in the silence. Adrian stepped toward the darkness, his hand reaching for the hilt of his decorative sword. "Who's there?" he barked. Eloin scrambled backward, her tattered red hem snagging on a thorn bush. She turned to flee deeper into the gardens, but a massive, solid form blocked her path. She collided with a wall of wool and starch. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her with a terrifying strength. She looked up into the piercing, icy blue eyes of Duke Cassian Blackthorne. He didn't look at the dirt on her face. He looked past her, straight through the archway at his fiancée, who was still frantically hiding her hand behind her back. "Lady Ashmere," the Duke whispered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, Why are you trembling in my garden? And what did you just see? Cassian's grip remained like iron on Eloin's shoulders, his icy gaze searching her face for the truth. Before she could find her voice, Vivienne's sharp call echoed from the archway. Cassian, is someone there? The Duke let go of Eloin, his eyes narrowing. Stay put, he commanded, his voice a low vibration. As he strode toward his fiancée, masking his fury with a mask of cold nobility, Eloin didn't stay. She couldn't. If she was caught here, she was a trespasser. If she stayed a servant, her word was worth nothing. She ducked into the shadows of the servants' passage, her heart drumming against her ribs. She stumbled into the darkened cloakroom, a graveyard of discarded finery. There, draped over a velvet chair, lay a shimmering silver silk shawl and a matching filigree mask, likely abandoned by a debutante who had fled in tears or a secret tryst. Eloin didn't hesitate. She plunged her hands into a basin of rosewater meant for the guests, scrubbing the garden soil from her skin until her knuckles were raw. She threw the silver shawl over her tattered red gown, pinning it with a discarded brooch to hide the soot-stained silk. She pulled the mask over her face, the cold silver pressing against her skin. In the mirror, the gardener vanished. The red diamond returned, haunting and mysterious. You look like a woman about to commit a crime, a voice drawled from the doorway. Eloin spun around. It was a footman she recognized, Thomas, a boy who had once served her father. He held a tray of champagne, his eyes wide as he recognized the fire in her gaze. I'm about to prevent one, Thomas, she whispered, her voice regaining the regal edge of her former life. If you ever cared for my father, get me into that ballroom. Now. Thomas nodded, handing her a glass of champagne as a prop. Walk like you own the floor, my lady. They only see what they expect to see. Eloin stepped through the heavy oak doors, the heat of 1,000 candles hitting her face. The orchestra was playing a frantic gallop. She moved through the sea of silk and lace, a silver ghost among the colorful peacocks. She could hear the whispers trailing in her wake like a slipstream. Who is she? That shawl, isn't that the Ashmere pattern? Impossible. Eloin Ashmere is scrubbing floors in the East End. She ignored them, her eyes locked on the Duke. He was standing near the punch bowl, Vivienne clinging to his arm like a golden leech. Eloin saw Vivienne's left hand, still encased in a lace glove, hiding the Montclair ring. Suddenly, a hand caught Eloin's elbow. She turned, expecting a guard, but found herself face to face with Lord Adrian Montclair. He looked at her through his own mask, a predatory smile on his lips. A mystery guest, he murmured, his breath smelling of gin. You have the grace of a queen and the eyes of a woman who knows too much. Shall we dance? Eloin felt the cold bite of the signet ring beneath his glove as he squeezed her hand. She was trapped. If she refused, she'd cause a scene. If she danced, she was seconds away from being unmasked. I prefer to choose my own partners, my lord, she countered, her wit as sharp as a blade. I insist, Adrian hissed, pulling her toward the center of the floor. But before they could take a step, a shadow fell over them both. Duke Cassian stood there, his blue sash glowing under the chandeliers. He didn't look at Adrian. He looked at the silver-masked woman, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of crushed roses and damp earth beneath the expensive rosewater. I believe this dance belongs to me, the Duke said, his voice a quiet threat. He didn't wait for an answer. He snatched Eloin's hand from Adrian's grip. As he led her to the floor, he leaned down, his lips brushing the edge of her silver mask. You cleaned up nicely, gardener. Now tell me whose blood is about to spill on my floor. The Duke's hand was a brand against Eloin's waist, his touch possessing and perilous. As the orchestra struck the first chords of a haunting waltz, he swept her into the center of the ballroom. The world became a blur of spinning gold and judging eyes. You move like a woman who was born to lead a cotillion, not prune the hedges, Cassian murmured, his voice vibrating through the silver silk of her borrowed shawl. Survival is a masterful teacher, your grace, Eloin replied, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt the weight of the room's collective gaze. Behind the filigree of her mask, her eyes scanned the perimeter. Vivienne stood by the refreshment table, her knuckles white as she gripped her fan, her gaze fixed on the Duke's mysterious partner. "The ton is buzzing, little ghost," Cassian noted, his eyes narrowing as he steered her past a cluster of gaping debutantes. "They say the Ashmere diamond has risen from the grave to haunt my engagement. Tell me, are you here for vengeance or for me?" "I am here for the truth," Eloin whispered, leaning closer until the scent of his sandalwood cologne filled her senses. "Look at Vivienne. She isn't jealous, she's terrified. She knows that masks eventually fall." The stakes escalated with every rotation. Lady Danbury, the unofficial gatekeeper of the ton, lowered her lorgnette and leaned toward her neighbor. "The poise, the height. If that isn't Eloin Ashmere, I shall eat my turban," the old woman's voice carried over the violin's swell. A ripple of scandalized murmurs followed. "The disgraced lady, here, trespassing." The romantic tension between Cassian and Eloin tightened like a pulled bowstring. For a fleeting second, the Duke's gaze softened, his thumb grazing the small of her back. "A year ago, I would have danced with you until the sun rose," he admitted, a trace of raw longing breaking through his stony exterior. "But tonight, Eloin, you are playing a dangerous game. If the guards unmask you before I get my answers, I cannot protect you from the scandal." "Then don't protect me," she challenged, her eyes flashing with fire. "Protect your name." As the waltz reached its crescendo, Eloin spotted Lord Adrian moving toward the Duke's head of security. He was pointing directly at her. The trap was closing. Eloin's breath caught. She had only moments before her identity was forcibly revealed. Just as the music died, a young debutante, Vivienne's closest ally, tripped intentionally into Eloin's path, her champagne glass tilting. The sticky liquid splashed across Eloin's silver shawl, the weight of the wet fabric pulling it down to reveal the tattered, soot-stained red gown beneath. The ballroom fell into a deafening silence. The lady in silver was revealed as a beggar in red. "Guards!" Vivienne's voice shrieked, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "Arrest this impostor." But before the guards could move, Cassian stepped in front of Eloin, his hand going to the hilt of his sword. He didn't look at the guards. He looked at the balcony, where the moonlight caught a glint of gold falling from Vivienne's pocket. "Wait," the Duke roared. "Before anyone is removed, I want to know why my fiancée just dropped a Montclair signet ring." The golden ballroom held its breath as the Duke's roar echoed off the frescoed ceiling. Vivienne stood frozen, her face a mask of porcelain terror as the Montclair signet ring lay mocking and bright upon the marble floor. But the scandal was a moving target. Before the guards could seize the moment, the orchestra, sensing the desperate need for a diversion, struck up a frantic, minor-key waltz. "It's a mistake, a trinket I found," Vivienne shrieked, but Cassian had already turned his back on her. Eloin felt the heat of his gaze. She didn't wait for permission. She stepped forward, the tattered red hem of her gown swishing against his polished boots. She cut directly between the Duke and his trembling fiancé. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice a low velvet blade that carried only to him. "The music is playing. Do not let them see you bleed. Dance with the truth instead." Cassian's jaw tightened, a muscle leaping in his cheek. With a predatory grace, he snatched Eloin's hand, pulling her into the fray of the waltz. His grip on her waist was no longer polite. It was possessive, his fingers splayed against the small of her back, pressing her so close she could feel the thrum of his heart against her ribs. "You have a penchant for theatrics, Lady Ashmere," he rasped, spinning her so sharply her silver mask nearly slipped. "And you have a penchant for blindness, my lord," she countered, her eyes locking onto his. "You are looking for a ring, but you should be looking for a date. The child Vivienne carries, it will be born in 7 months. Count the weeks, Cassian. You were in Vienna 10 weeks ago. Adrian Montclair was not." The Duke's grip tightened until it was nearly painful, a silent gasp escaping his lips. The romantic tension flared between them, a volatile mix of old longing and new betrayal. For a moment, the world disappeared, the gossiping biddies, the scowling rogue, the shamed fiancé. There was only the heat of his palm and the devastating secret vibrating between their bodies. "If you are lying to me," he whispered, his lips inches from her ear, "I will ensure you never see the sun again." "And if I am right," she breathed back, "you will owe me a life." As they neared the edge of the floor, Eloin saw Adrian Montclair moving toward the Duke's drink, his hand hovering suspiciously over the crystal glass. A new, darker fear spiked in her chest. This wasn't just a social assassination, it was a physical one. "Cassian, stop!" she cried, breaking the rhythm of the dance. The Duke followed her frantic gaze just as Adrian tipped a small, amber vial into the Duke's wine. The room blurred as Cassian lunged, but he didn't grab the glass. He grabbed Adrian by the throat, slamming him against a marble pillar. "Tell me, Montclair," Cassian hissed, "is the poison for me or for the witness?" But the true shock came from the balcony above. A voice rang out, the Dowager Duchess, Cassian's mother, clutching a stack of letters. "It's too late for silence, Cassian. The letters, they've been leaked to the press already." The crash of the Dowager's announcement sent the ballroom into a feral frenzy, but Cassian didn't wait for the scandal to swallow them. His hand clamped around Eloin's wrist, his touch no longer a dancer's lead, but a captor's shackle. He dragged her through a concealed servant's door, the heavy mahogany thudding shut and drowning out the shrieks of the ton. Inside the dim, leather-scented sanctuary of his private study, the air was thick with the scent of old books and unspoken history. Cassian spun her around, shoving her back against the door. He leaned in, his shadow looming over her, his breathing ragged and hot against her cheek. "Who are you working for, Eloin?" he demanded, his voice a low, terrifying vibrate. "The girl I knew a year ago wouldn't have known about the letters, let alone the timing of a child's birth." Eloin's chest heaved, her silver mask finally slipping to the floor with a hollow clack. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears and a defiant fire. "The girl you knew a year ago believed in your honor, Cassian. The woman standing before you only believes in the truth." "The truth," Cassian laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. He reached out, his thumb grazing the line of her jaw, lingering on the skin where the soot met the pale cream of her neck. The anger in his eyes flickered, replaced for a heartbeat by a devastating, raw recognition. "I recognize those eyes. They haunted my dreams in Vienna while I tried to forget how I let the ton exile you. But now, you return as a ghost in a gardener's rags, whispering poison about my fiancée the very night my reputation is shredded by the press." "I didn't leak those letters," Eloin gasped, her pulse leaping under his touch. "If I wanted to ruin you, I would have let you drink that wine." The romantic tension between them was a physical weight, a magnetic pull that threatened to bridge the inches between their lips. Cassian's gaze dropped to her mouth, his resolve visibly crumbling. "You were always the cleverest girl in London," he whispered, his hand sliding into her hair. "Tell me you didn't do this. Tell me you aren't the one who orchestrated this entire night just to claw your way back to a title." "I don't want a title," she whispered back, leaning into him, her heart shattering at the doubt in his voice. "I wanted you to be safe." The Duke froze. He pulled back just as a frantic pounding began on the study door. "Your Grace," his valet shouted, "the guards have found Lord Adrian, but he claims Lady Ashmere was his accomplice. He says she stole the Montclair ring to plant it on Lady Vivienne." Eloin's blood ran cold. The rogue was turning the narrative. Cassian looked at the door, then back at Eloin. The doubt returned to his eyes, colder than before. He reached into his desk and pulled out a heavy set of iron keys. "I want to believe you," he rasped, his voice breaking. "But until the truth is proven, I cannot let you leave." He didn't call the guards. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the bookshelf, swinging it open to reveal a hidden passage leading to the bell tower. "Go. If they find you here, I won't be able to stop them from hanging you for treason." "Cassian, wait." "Go," he roared, but as she stepped into the dark, he caught her hand one last time. "Eloin, if you lied to me, I will be the one to drop the noose." The cold stone of the hidden passage bit into Eloin's heels, but she didn't run. She couldn't, not with the shadow of a noose and the sting of Cassian's doubt lingering in the air. As the bookshelf began to groan shut, she thrust her soot-stained hand into the gap, blocking the mechanism. "I am no accomplice, Cassian," she hissed, the candlelight from the study dancing in her frantic eyes. "And I will not hide like a criminal while a snake wears your colors." Cassian gripped the edge of the shelf, his knuckles white. "The guards are at the door, Eloin. Adrian has witnesses, paid or otherwise, placing you at his side for months. If you stay, you are walking into a trap I cannot spring." "Then look at the bait," she countered. She stepped back into the room, ignoring the frantic pounding on the mahogany door. She reached into the hidden, torn pocket of her red gown and pulled out the heavy gold band she had snatched from the garden soil. She didn't hand it to him. She grabbed his hand, the one that had just held her with such terrifying suspicion, and pressed the metal into his palm. "You think I stole this to plant it? Look at the underside, Cassian. Look at the engraving." The Duke's breath caught as he brought the ring to the light. His eyes widened, his anger momentarily eclipsed by a chilling clarity. On the inner band, a date was etched, August 14th. "The night of the royal masquerade," Cassian whispered, his voice trembling. "I was at the border. Vivienne told me she was in bed with a fever." "She was in the garden with Adrian," Eloin said, stepping closer until her chest brushed the silver buttons of his tunic. "And look at the crest again. It isn't just the Montclair seal. It's a combined sigil, a union of two houses. They've been planning to siphon the Blackthorne estate for over a year." The romantic tension snapped back into place, sharp and electric. Cassian's gaze dropped from the ring to Eloin's lips. The proximity was intoxicating, the scent of rain-soaked roses on her skin clashing with the musk of his library. For a heartbeat, the guards, the scandal, and the tons ceased to exist. "You found this in the dirt," he rasped, his hand moving to her waist, pulling her flush against him. "Risking everything to bring it to me. Why, Eloin, after I stood by and let them ruin you a year ago?" "Because," she whispered, her hand rising to touch the cyan sash across his chest, "I would rather be a ruined gardener who told the truth than a duchess who lived a lie." The study door shuddered under a final, heavy blow. The lock groaned. "Your Grace, we are entering." Cassian didn't flinch. He looked at the ring, then at Eloin, a predatory resolve hardening his features. He didn't push her into the passage. Instead, he reached for his discarded mask and handed it back to her. "Keep your head high, my lady," he said, his voice a low, lethal promise. "We aren't hiding anymore. We're going back to the ballroom, but first." He leaned down, his lips hovering a hair's breadth from hers, the heat of his breath making her dizzy. "I need one more thing from you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box, the one intended for Vivienne. "I'm making a new announcement," he whispered, "and you're going to be the reason the ton never sleeps tonight." The study doors burst inward just as Cassian stepped back, but the guards froze. Instead of a struggling criminal, they found their duke standing in glacial composure, his hand possessively covering Eloin's soot-stained fingers. "Step aside," Cassian commanded. The authority in his voice was a physical weight. "The only traitors in this house are currently drinking my champagne in the ballroom." He didn't let Eloin slip away into the shadows. He tucked her hand firmly into the crook of his arm, his muscles bunching beneath his formal coat. As they walked toward the double doors leading back to the gala, Eloin felt the friction of her tattered red silk against his pristine trousers. She was a mess of garden dirt and raw nerves, yet he walked with her as if she were draped in the crown jewels. "They will tear me apart, Cassian," she whispered, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. "The scandal of my return is enough. To be seen on your arm now is social suicide for you." "Let them try," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fleeting, scorching second. "I have spent a year being a duke. Tonight, I'd rather be a man who protects what is his." The doors swung open. The ballroom, previously a hive of panicked whispering, went deathly silent. The orchestra's violins screeched to a halt. Eloin felt the heat of 500 judgmental stares. Vivienne stood at the center of the floor, flanked by her father and a smug, recovered Lord Adrian. Vivienne's face twisted with a mix of triumph and venom. "There she is," Vivienne pointed a gloved finger, her voice shrill. "The thief who tried to ruin my reputation. Cassian, thank heaven you've captured her. Guards, take her to the tower immediately." Cassian didn't release Eloin. Instead, he led her directly into the center of the circle, stopping mere inches from Vivienne. The contrast was devastating, Vivienne in her flawless white lace, and Eloin in her battle-worn, soot-streaked red. I have indeed captured something tonight, Vivienne, Cassian said, his voice carrying to the furthest corners of the gallery. I have captured the truth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the Montclair signet ring, holding it up so the candlelight danced off the gold. Adrian's face turned the color of ash. A collective gasp rippled through the ton. A special announcement was promised, Cassian roared, his eyes sweeping the room. And you shall have it, but it is not the union you expected. He turned to Eloin, and before the entire world, he went down on one knee. The room shook with the force of the indrawn breaths. Lady Eloin Ashmere, he said, his voice suddenly thick with an emotion that made her throat ache. A year ago, I let the shadows take you. Tonight, I ask you to take the light. But as he reached for her hand, the Dowager Duchess screamed from the balcony, Cassian, look out. Adrian Montclair had lunged, not for the Duke, but for the glass of poisoned wine still sitting on the side table, aiming to throw it directly into Eloin's face. The amber liquid arched through the air, a lethal spray of poisoned wine aimed at Eloin's face, but Cassian was faster. With a snarl of primal protection, he pivoted, using his own heavy velvet coat as a shield. The wine splashed harmlessly against the dark fabric, hissing as it ate into the fibers, proof of the venom intended for the witness. Seize him, Cassian roared, his voice cracking like a whip. The guards tackled Adrian to the marble before he could draw another breath. The ballroom was a tomb of silence, broken only by Vivienne's panicked sobbing. She fell to her knees, clutching at the hem of Cassian's trousers. It was Adrian. He forced me, Cassian. He threatened me. Cassian looked down at her, his expression more terrifying than rage. It was utter indifference. He stepped back, leaving her to collapse onto the floor. The time for lies ended the moment Lady Ashmere stepped out of the dirt, he said, his voice cold enough to frost the champagne glasses. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a thick ledger bound in scuffed leather. This is the Harrowmont estate record, he announced, turning to the crowd. Or rather, the record of its bankruptcy. Vivienne, you didn't seek a marriage. You sought a liquidation of the Blackthorne coffers to pay off the gambling debts of your lover. A roar of scandalized whispers erupted. Eloin stood beside him, her hand still trembling, but her chin held high. She saw the Dowager Duchess descend the stairs, handing Cassian a final, incriminating letter. And here, Cassian continued, his eyes burning into Vivienne, is the physician's report you tried to burn. It confirms a pregnancy of 12 weeks. I was in Vienna for 14. You didn't just bring a rogue into my house, Vivienne, you tried to plant a cuckoo in my nest. The humiliation was absolute. Lady Danbury stepped forward, her cane thumping the floor with finality. A fraud, a cheat, and a murderess in the making. Remove her. The guards moved in, stripping the Blackthorne family crest from Vivienne's neck as they dragged her and Adrian toward the doors. Vivienne's screams faded into the night, leaving the ballroom in a state of stunned shock. Cassian turned to Eloin. The red diamond was covered in soot, her dress was a ruin. And her silver mask lay forgotten in the study. Yet, in the light of the crystal chandeliers, she had never looked more radiant. He took her blackened hand and raised it to his lips, kissing the dirt-stained knuckles with a reverence that silenced every gossip in the room. The Tun owes you an apology, Lady Ashmere, he whispered, loud enough for every ear to catch, but I owe you a life and a crown. Just as the first notes of a celebratory march began to play, Eloin leaned in, her eyes dancing. The crown can wait, Your Grace, but the gardener's wages are significantly overdue. Cassian laughed, the first real sound of joy the house had heard in a year, but the moment was shattered when the front doors flew open and a mud-splattered courier rushed in. Your Grace, a message from the king, the Ashmere estate, it wasn't lost. It was stolen by your own father. The courier's words hung in the air like a guillotine's blade. Stolen. The ballroom, once filled with the scent of scandal, now reeked of a deeper, older rot. Eloin felt the world tilt, her hand slipping from Cassian's arm as the truth of her family's ruin, the hunger, the soot, the long nights of shame, refracted through a new, horrific lens. My father, Cassian whispered, his face turning a ghostly shade of grey. He snatched the royal parchment, his eyes darting across the king's seal. The middle of the room cleared as if a plague had struck. The Tun watched, breathless, as the Duke's hands began to shake. He didn't just win the Ashmere lands in a card game, Cassian rasped, his voice breaking. He forged the deeds. He bankrupted your father to clear his own debts. He looked at Eloin, the weight of a stolen legacy sitting between them like a mountain of ice. My entire life, my wealth, this very house, it was built on the bones of your family's happiness. I was a gardener in a home that belonged to me, Eloin breathed, the irony tasting like copper in her mouth. The romantic tension that had simmered all night was suddenly replaced by a raw, bleeding wound of betrayal. You didn't just exile me, Cassian, your bloodline erased mine. The Dowager Duchess stepped forward, her head bowed in a rare moment of genuine humility. The king has ordered the immediate restoration of the Ashmere title and all associated lands. You are no longer a servant, Eloin. You are the wealthiest peeress in England. The fallen Rose was no longer a ghost. She was the mistress of the realm. Cassian dropped the parchment, his knees nearly buckling. He looked at the woman he loved, covered in the dirt of his gardens, wearing the rags of his mercy, and realized he was the one who was truly bankrupt. I cannot ask for your hand, he said, his voice a ragged sob. Not when I am standing on your stolen soil. I will vacate Blackthorne by morning. It is yours, all of it. The Tun held its breath. Eloin looked at the man who had protected her from a poisoned glass, then at the dirt on her own hands. She had the power to ruin him, to take his house and cast him into the same darkness she had survived. It was the ultimate restoration. She stepped toward him, her soot-stained hand reaching out to touch his cyan sash one last time. The room was silent enough to hear a heart break. You are not your father, Cassian, she whispered, her eyes burning with a choice that would change the Tun forever. But I cannot marry a man who is fleeing from the truth. She turned to the stunned crowd, her voice ringing out with the authority of a queen. The Ashmere title is restored, but the Blackthorne Duke stays, as my steward, and perhaps, if he earns it, as something more. She didn't kiss him, she handed him the gardener's shears she had hidden in her belt. The gardens need tending, your grace, start there. Should Eloin have truly forgiven him, or was his family's crime too deep to ever bridge the gap? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for the next royal scandal.